Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Christina here. I hope you are having the most amazing day ever. If you are new to the page, my name is Christina. I am a naturopath, herbalist, nutritionist, life coach, all of the things, as well as a carnivore. And so in this space, I'm sharing my journey as a carnivore and what's happening for me and why I've gone on this experience, but also any tips and tricks and answering your questions. So the question that I have received yesterday was about budget and cost when it comes to carnivore. So the question was, do your grocery bills go up essentially when you are on carnivore? Now the answer to that question is actually multifaceted. And generally what I will say to people is in the first month or two, absolutely your price of food is going to go up, especially in this current time where the price of meat is actually gone up. The availability of some of those cheaper items are off the marks when it comes to carnivore, and so yes, in the early stages of carnivore, definitely the prices, that your cost will go up, especially depending on what you have been eating before. But let's say you were eating a purely organic diet before, then your cost of carnivore might not actually change that much. But if you are eating a lot of carbohydrates and grains and rice and a lot of fillers, then it absolutely is going to cost you more than if you are buying 2-minute noodles, or if you were buying rice and filling everybody up with rice. It will certainly cost you more from that perspective. Now, how much more depends on the size of your family, how much you actually eat, all of those types of things, like how old your children are, etc., etc. Now, I have a family of 9, so there's my husband and myself and our 7 children. Now, my children are around about 80% carnivore. I say that because, you know, they will, if we're like, okay, here's what happened. We are currently traveling Australia, and there was a beautiful man that came around. I think it was probably one of the things that he does is he goes around the camping or the caravan sites and they sell their produce. And I think they must have got to the end of their produce and then said, is there anyone that could benefit from it? And they mentioned us. And so he drove by and he gave us some pumpkins. He gave us some watermelons, tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, capsicums, etc. So there was a whole heap of vegetables there. Now my kids are going to eat those. I'm not going to eat those because I have health complications. The children don't have those health complications, and so, you know, they've got a little bit more flexibility when it comes to consuming those. So they definitely ate the watermelons. They're eating the vegetables right now. They are making themselves a meal based on those vegetables. I however am staying purely carnivore. And so from that perspective, when those types of things happen, absolutely, they're going to eat those. They're going to fill up on those. If there is, you know, some fruit, etc., they may consume some of those. And then if they have a little bit of money, so if they've earned a little bit of money doing something, they may buy what they want to buy with that money. But 80% of their diet is essentially carnivore, and then there's like that 20 sort of percentage wiggle room for them. The other time when they are not carnivore is when we've got a travel day. So when we are driving and we're driving for long periods of time, we've not organized food, etc., we might get some takeout for them, and then, you know, the cheapest version is something like Domino's pizza, etc., where we can feed, you know, 7 children for about $30, and so that's one of those other times. And it's not something we do every day. It's something that we probably do once or twice a month at most, and of course we try to plan and try to organize ourselves. But when you're living in a tent and it takes like 2 hours to pack up in the morning and then 2 hours or more to set up when you get there, that's 4 hours of your day plus 4 hours driving time. Depending on how far we're going, most of the day is gone, and so we have a life, and so we have some compromises there for them. I don't participate in pizza. My husband will sometimes do it and sometimes not. Mostly he's not, because he's starting to see how much better he feels without it, and so he's doing that less and less frequently. But for me, I certainly am not doing it because my metabolic status can't actually handle those type of carbohydrates, and it would mean that I would have a week of recovery from that food, and I just don't need it. So cost wise, again, it depends on how much you spent before and so on. But one of the things that I generally say to people is that in the first couple of months, it likely is going to cost you more, especially if you have been very nutrient depleted. So if you have been eating a lot of things like rice and grains and sugars, etc., without a lot of nutrients in them, what's going to happen is you're going to have really reduced nutrient stores. And so in order to fill those up, it can take more food in the beginning to fill those up. And that means that everyone can be like, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, and they can be really hungry. The other thing too is that as you start to transition, a lot of people don't realize how much fat they actually need to be having, and so they are scrimping, or they are not adding extra butter and those types of things to their meals. And adding that extra butter dramatically cuts down how much actual protein you need to eat, because you are feeling satisfied, full and satiated, and you're getting all of those fat soluble vitamins. And so from that perspective, if you're eating a lot and everybody's really hungry, you definitely want to eat to satisfaction in those early months. And I wouldn't even say, like I'm saying months, but actually for most people, it's usually the first month. Usually by the end of the first month, they're pretty good and they're pretty covered. But again, it depends. Like it's kind of like a moving playing field. If you've got somebody who's significantly chronically sick, they may need to eat more to start with and fill up those nutritional stores, whereas somebody who's not that chronically sick might not need to. And so I do tell people, just prepare that it's going to be maybe a little bit more expensive when you first start out. And after that, what happens is once you start to really get the hang of how much fat your body needs, and you can take that in and you can utilize it, once you get the hang of eating to satisfaction, etc., you can then start to notice that your meals will drop off. Like instead of having 3 meals a day, you might only have 2, or you might even drop down to 1.5. And you're just not feeling as hungry. Or you might have smaller meals versus bigger meals. And that's pretty common when it comes to carnivore, especially if you're really hitting those fat ratios. If you're really getting enough fat in, what's going to happen is that you're going to feel satisfied and you're not going to feel hungry. So that will certainly help when it comes to your budget. Now, the other thing I usually say to people is, make that first week, at least, make that first week your favorite meat. So if you like salmon, get the salmon. If you like, a tomahawk steak, get a tomahawk steak. If you like ribeye, if you like pork belly, if you like Scotch fillet, get the things that you actually like, so that you're looking forward to your meals, as opposed to, oh God, I've got meat again. And especially when you're not feeling well, like when you're going through some detoxification and not feeling fabulous, you want to make sure that the food that you're going to be eating is the stuff that goes, oh my God, I can't wait to eat this. And after that, you can then start to look at budget, and you can look at things, making things cost effective. Now, within that cost effectiveness, there are certainly some cuts of meat that are going to be cheaper. Now, we were at the butcher's the other day, and they had chicken wings for $4. Essentially, it was $3.99, so it was basically $4. And that's a really reasonable price to actually feed my family. They also had chicken drumsticks. Again, at this particular time in that sale, they had them for $4.99. Now, that fluctuates a couple of dollars here and there. Sometimes you'll get them for $6, sometimes you'll get them for $7. But you want to shop to what's actually on special and what's on sale. Now, from the chicken perspective, I have to be really mindful about how much I'm actually eating, because when I eat a lot of chicken, even though I love it, like I absolutely love chicken, right? I love chicken wings, I love chicken drumsticks, I love chicken. I'm not so much a fan of the chicken breast, but I love chicken. And so I have to be mindful of how much I'm eating, because I know for me, chicken tends to make my blood glucose higher. And it will mean that, if my blood glucose is higher, it'll kick me out of ketosis. And I have had weight gains when I've had multiple meals in a day that have been chicken. So if I've had 2 meals in that day that are chicken, the likelihood is that I'm going to gain weight the next day. So for me, that's something that I need to be mindful of. I don't need to be mindful so much for the children. The other thing when it comes to chicken is that the ratio of calories made up of fat versus calories made up of protein is about 50-50 with the skin on. And so in order to hit some of those fat goals, I actually have to add more fat to it. So I need to add some butter to it, or some cheese, or some sour cream, or some duck fat, or something else that is higher in fat, in order to make up for the lack of fat that you're going to find in chicken. So chicken is a pretty cheap option. Another one is tuna. So we often will get cans of tuna and we'll use sour cream. So we'll mix some sour cream and some garlic and maybe some onion, salt or onion powder through that actual tuna. And then we'll use pork rinds as well. For me, I'm going to use the pork rinds. The kids will sometimes use pork rinds, but then they'll have like maybe a packet of chips that they're going to share amongst them to do their dipping with. And so that's another reasonably priced protein source as well. Eggs are a really good cheap protein source too, and you know, you can utilize those to fill people up. You can boil them, you can have them on the go ready for people who are hungry, etc., etc. So that's another good source, and if you have your own chickens or ducks, that's going to be even better. So there are ways of making it cheaper. There are certainly ways of making it the most expensive thing you've ever done in your life, but there are also ways of making it cheaper, and that is by selecting cheaper cuts of meat. Now, the other aspect is that we're now on the mainland. So if you're out of Australia, we've come from Tasmania and got on a boat and come to the big island, essentially. So the big part of Australia we've landed on, which means that we have access to more things than we did when we lived in Tasmania. One of those things is Aldi. Now, Aldi tends to have pork mince reasonably cheap. It's about $4 a kilo for pork mince. They also have chicken drumsticks and chicken wings that are also really cheap as well. And they do also have things like Scotch steaks and so on that are also cheap. Now, I like to mix it up if I can, so that, you know, I'm not only eating from Aldi, but I'm also supporting a local butcher or a local farmer when I can, the local IGAs, etc., etc. And so I like to spread it around when I can, when I actually have the budget to do that, because I do want to support those local businesses as much as possible. Now, that will depend on what you have available to you financially, but I can tell you that after you've done about a month of carnivore, everyone starts to feel satisfied, everybody's feeling satiated, and you actually tend to start to eat less. You eat less often and you eat less in the actual meal. And so that tends to bring the price down. And there are lots of other ways that you can bring that price down as well. Remembering that organ meats are actually relatively cheap. So things like heart, which is very much like steak because it is a muscle meat, it's packed full of nutrition. So it's got good sources of magnesium in it. It's got good sources of calcium, etc., etc. It's going to be a much cheaper meat. And you can slice that. If nobody's looking, nobody will know. Like, seriously, I've sliced it up while my kids have not looked, stir-fried it, and they have no idea that that's what they're actually eating. So I will stir-fry it with a little bit of salt and pepper and maybe some garlic powder, and then I'll put some sour cream on the top and maybe even some cheese, and they have no clue that that's what they're actually eating. And that's a cheap source of protein as well. Liver, which is going to be beneficial for you in multiple different ways, supporting the nutrients of your liver, but also actually helping to bring in things like vitamin C, bring in all sorts of other good nutrients for you, B vitamins, etc. Then that's another cheaper form of food. The other things too are things like chuck steak. Now, I have only ever used chuck steak or gravy steak previously in my life for casseroles, where I've slow cooked them in a casserole, and it's just been, you know, slow cooked so that it falls apart. Well, I also didn't realize that if you chop them up into smaller pieces and fry them, they actually go really well as well. So they're either a really quick cook or a really slow cook. The in-between stuff doesn't work so well, but a really fast cook or a really slow cook works really well with those chucks and those gravy steaks. And again, another cheap meat to actually be able to access. And so there are lots of different ways to be able to consume carnivore rich foods and be mindful of your budget. Butter is one of those, sour cream is one of those. If you up the fat in the actual meal, you eat less food because you're feeling satiated and satisfied, and you don't need any more. It also gets your calories up as well. So a block of decent butter is going to actually be able to help you get those calories up and the fat up and lower your cost. The other thing that we have not included yet, but is on my list to include, is milk kefir. Now, milk kefir is a beautiful probiotic-rich food that is fantastic for your gut health. It is also really good for multiple different health reasons, and it really just costs how much it costs you to buy milk. So if you've got access to milk at $2 a litre, $3 a litre, whatever, price you actually have access to it, that's how much it's going to cost you approximately to make a litre of milk kefir. And that's another really good nutritional source of food. It's going to increase your fats. It's also going to improve your gut health as well. And so that's another source of food. So my answer to the question of budget is it really depends on what you want to do and what you want to eat. So I just am sitting here because my kids are making the fried rice is what they're having with all of the vegetables that were there. They're making some fried rice to go with some leftover meat that we actually had, etc., and those vegetables that they got given. And I'm not going to eat it. So what I got was this, which is essentially, it's some double brie. I got this from the local IGA. It was $3.50. Lunch done, $3.50. I have not eaten the whole block of this. My husband might want some, but I could eat the whole block if I want to, and that would be it. That's how much it would cost me to have lunch, is $3.50. Now I'm curious, if you're working in an office and you buy your food, how much does your lunch cost you? If you are if you are at home and you're making your own lunch, how much does your lunch cost you? Now this is certainly not what I eat every single day, but I'm eating this probably more expensive than what I would pay most days, just simply because I don't want to eat the stir fry that they're having, and I'm not really hungry. I don't really need to get anything else out. At this point, I will have dinner and I will have a steak with some butter on it, and I'm going to be super happy with that. So really, I'm just having this to tide me over until then. And I'm not super hungry. So from that perspective, there are lots of ways that you can cut down the costs. You can make burgers. You can make mince burgers with, some of the Aldi mince, for example, or some of the cheap cut of meat that you can actually process yourself at home. It doesn't have to be super expensive. It certainly can be if all you want to do is eat the premium cuts of beef, but it doesn't have to be. And I know for my family, prior to carnivore, I'll just give you one example because this is coming to mind. Prior to carnivore, one of the things that we would often have would have been a roast roll of pork. And that roast roll of pork I saw today, they had one for $22 to buy that roast roll of pork, like the size that would be good for our family for a roast. And we would have had vegetables that went with it. So they would have had pumpkin and carrots, onions, other vegetables. Like most of the plate would have been made up of vegetables. Then we would have made gravy, all of that type of stuff. Now that would have been a meal that would have probably ultimately cost us a good, by the time we tallied up all the pumpkin and so on, probably maybe $35, maybe a little bit more, depending on what we had in our own garden. But now I can buy that roast, same price, $22, and I would buy a block of butter, so that would be another $3, so that would be what, $25, and some salt. I didn't factor the salt into the other price, but let's say I bought $2 worth of salt, that would be, $27, and that actually probably would be enough to satisfy everyone, because we would use the pork, make the crackle, we would take all the juices from that, mix it through with some butter, pour that over the top as our gravy, and then everybody's got a big whammy of fat and some protein, and they're pretty much full. And so it's probably sometimes actually cheaper when we're actually eating carnivore. The other thing that I want to add to that is when my kids are eating protein for breakfast, they're not hungry for lunch. They usually don't start to get a little bit hungry until maybe 3 or 4. And at that point, we're just about to make dinner. So often when they are eating carnivore and I've put enough fat in the meal, they're actually reducing how much they're actually eating, and they're feeling satisfied and they're not whining about food. Whereas if they had some Wheat Bix or some type of other cereal with milk, they are hungry, and I can guarantee it. About an hour and a half after they've eaten that thing, they're like, where's the food? And they are hungry, and they eat a lot more when they're eating those higher carbohydrate foods than when they're eating the proteins. So that's another thing to factor into your thought process when it comes to how much does it cost. All right, that's it for me today. If you have any other comments or questions, let me know. I'd love to serve you here. Bye for now. See you later.